Hello everyone, I'm Asha Nayaswami. We're continuing with our fireside chats. The theme right now is the gurus of this particular line of self-realization. So let's begin by praying to them. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we offer our lives in service and devotion to your cause of self-realization for all. Walk with us, guide us and bless us. We stumble in this world with our own thoughts and our own delusions. Fill us with an awareness of your living presence, that all shadows will flee in the presence of that divine light, and your presence will illuminate our path clearly and unmistakably. Help us to be strong in our aspirations and in our courage, and above all in our joy, that we may live in thy joy and share thy bliss with everyone. Om. Peace. Amen. I've been talking sort of in general ways about the gurus, and now I want to talk more specifically today about Jesus. When people first come to Ananda, their inclination is to think that Jesus is on the altar because this is a Western country after all, and it's respectable to do so. It would make us seem more like in keeping with what's going on. So it's actually a little startling when a person comes to realize that we see Jesus as an active force combined with the force of our masters. Even as I say this is interesting to me because, well, I was raised Jewish, but I was raised quite neutral about Jesus. Some Jewish people, when they come to Ananda, and a lot of Jews come to Ananda because any innovative movement always has a lot of Jews in it. That's just the way it is. I think Ananda is actually 10% Jewish, if I'm not mistaken. That seems really high to me, really high, but it's surprisingly high because Jews are often taught to innovate and taught to think outside the box and live outside the mainstream, sometimes because it's been compelled. But in any case, whatever that's worth, I was raised completely neutral toward Jesus, so it made as much sense to me that he would be part of this lineage as he wouldn't be. I didn't have any of that dogma of exclusivity related to Jesus. But what Master brings to us in talking about Jesus is that he was not a standalone avatar who just came with this unique position. He fits into the tradition of Sanatana Dharma, which is whenever virtue declines and vice predominates, I, the infinite spirit, take visible form in order to drive back darkness and to restore righteousness again. And in the Indian scriptures, the constant return of these self-realized masters in various incarnations everywhere in order to do exactly that is just well understood. So the way that Jesus fits in our line of masters is simply not through the church. I had this experience before in Palo Alto, before we had the beautiful church building that we presently occupy and have had since 1994. Whenever we wanted to do a big event, we just had a suite of office, an office suite with a nice big room, but it was just an office suite. And we wanted to do a big event, like where we wanted to serve food or have multi things going on at the same time, or a big public gathering. We had to rent a church. We had to rent a facility, and we tended to rent other people's churches. So one year we rented a church in Palo Alto, right near where we are now. And it was very suitable, and we liked it very much. So when the following year came, we used to use it especially in January. We had a big event for Master, not on his birthday, but later, but just a celebration of Paramhansa Yogananda. So when the following year came and I wanted to rent it again, I went to see the church to make arrangements, assuming it would be simple. And my name had been flagged, and I had to go sit with the pastor of the church, who had somehow gotten wind of what we had actually done there and was quite uncertain as to whether it was a suitable thing to happen in his sanctuary. And so I talked to him a little bit about who we were, and I told him that Yogananda came from India, and he taught from both the Bhagavad Gita and the Bible, especially the New Testament. And I remember the pastor drew himself up like this and said, "He doesn't presume to call himself a Christian, does he?" I said, and then I'm just like, I drew myself up too. And I said, yes, as a matter of fact, he does. I said, he doesn't draw his relationship to Jesus through the church. He draws it directly from Jesus. And of course, we didn't rent the church. In fact, later, other members of that congregation who also came to Ananda told me that nobody liked that pastor because he was much too narrow-minded to be serving in an area like this. But in any case, I thought about that later because I just in the moment I'd said exactly what I meant. He doesn't draw his lineage through the church at all, directly from the Bible, but even then interpreting the Bible in the light of Sanatana Dharma, but directly from Jesus. Now, of course, an avatar has the right to do that. Master actually made commentaries on the New Testament, which are published by SRF in a 2 or 3 volume set. I'm turning backwards to see if I have the book here. Swamiji wrote a book that is, when Swamiji did Master's commentary on the Gita, he did it verse by verse. When Swami wrote about Jesus, he wrote this book. I'm not sure if you can read the title because of the lighting. It's called Revelations of Christ. And there's a lot of interpretation of biblical scripture here, but it doesn't parallel the Bible the way the Gita commentary just goes through the Gita. What he actually talks about is he goes right to the actual heart of the matter. And the heart of the matter is, who has the right to speak for Jesus? Because after 2,000 years, even those who call themselves Christians fight all the time, start with the Catholics and the Protestants, and then you have countless sects within each of those, and they're all asserting that this is what Jesus wanted, but they can't agree. So you have theologians argue, you have church authorities argue, you have denominations argue, you have historians getting into the act. And then Swami said, worst of all, now you have novelists who are just writing whatever stories they happen to want to write that sounds good with Jesus and Mary as main characters. He said, who among all of this has the right to speak about what Jesus really meant? And Swami says, those who share his consciousness. In other words, the authority for what Jesus taught is those who have had all, or at least some, of the same revelation as Jesus. So the saints are the authority, and everyone else is expressing an opinion. I mean, literally, a group of theologians got together and discussed different biblical passages and then voted on what it meant. And then whatever the majority of people thought it meant, that became the official word of what it actually meant. I mean, truth can't be voted. People vote what they know. If enlightenment is progressive, then some are more enlightened than others. That's all. So Master's relationship to Jesus was direct. Now, how direct? Well, I proposed yesterday, Swamiji, at the end of his life, started saying that he thought that Master was a reincarnation of Jesus himself. I said, Swamiji, why wouldn't he have said that in public? Swami just looked at me and he said, can you imagine what would have happened to Master if he had said that? Because when Swami asked him directly if he was, Master replied, what difference would it make? Which was an interesting answer. But that's beside the point. I'm not here to argue that. The point is that the teaching of Jesus is Sanatana Dharma. He spent 18 years in India, and the Christianity that Thomas took to India was pure Sanatana Dharma. He stepped into India, he merged with that culture, and he taught Sanatana Dharma, but he came also to lift Sanatana Dharma into a clearer light. And I mentioned yesterday, Thomas was eventually martyred. And what finally happened in India, which is really so interesting, is that a unique kind of Christianity existed in India for like 300 years. And it blended completely with Sanatana Dharma. It was just this other avatar, Jesus the Christ, who had been martyred in another country but had lived 18 years in their country. Thomas, as his representative, taught them Sanatana Dharma through this particular avatar. Then the Portuguese arrived in South India. And the Portuguese, who were Catholic, were horrified to discover that there was this entire renegade heretic cult that called themselves Christians. And so systematically, the Portuguese expunged it. They burned all the papers, they burned all the history, they forced conversion on everyone who purported to be a disciple of Jesus but wasn't following their way. And then they just rewrote history. So it simply never existed. These are marvelous, just little bits and pieces of reality that as we go into a higher age, things become clearer. So what we end up with is this living power and presence of Jesus on in the center of the altar, not more important than any of the other gurus, but equally so, because every avatar shows us a way to live in accordance with God's will, and they show us a way that is unique to their life. And then both their living consciousness and also the example of their life just gives us one more way to be able to tune in and to understand. Now, the part of Jesus's life that it really represents Christianity is the 3.5 years, a little bit of his childhood, just a tiny bit, and then the 3.5 years in which the life that's chronicled in the New Testament, because that was really why he came. And what you see in that life of Christ, it's twofold. It's very interesting. On one hand, Jesus was the living personification of absolute unwavering determination despite the obstacles, even up to and including being arrested, tortured, and executed. And that's the end point of how much courage do I have to stand up. I've been doing another series, which isn't public yet, but will be before too long, Living Wisely, Living Well. This is like 365 wonderful suggestions for how to live wisely and live well. A great number of them have to do with standing firm according to your own inner beliefs, no matter what the pressures are around you. And because the little suggestions are not long, at most they're one page, oftentimes Swami packs quite a lot into them. And there's one of them that's about 5 sentences long that starts by saying you should cooperate with people who have high ideals and work with them. But by the 5th sentence, it says you have to be willing to be burned at the stake for your beliefs. And there's not a lot of, transition, especially in that book. Swami's writing aphorisms almost, where, just the essence of it is there, and he's at the top of the mountain telling you the view, and you have to figure out how to get from the valley up to there. He'll give you 5 sentences, which are like little signs along the path at different turns to be able to get there. But that quality, that ability to know what is true and to remain unchanged no matter what the pressure on you is a reality that all of us need at different times in our lives. What I love about having 5 gurus instead of just one, what makes it interesting, what everything about this path is interesting, is that each one of them brings a particular, you might call, paint color to the whole painting. And so sometimes you want to concentrate on the green, sometimes the pink, sometimes the yellow. But what you end up when you have it all is that you have, well, let's use the word rainbow now. You have a whole rainbow. And Lahiri Mahashaya's life, by contrast, I believe I said yesterday how Master said Lahiri was lucky because there weren't even any wars during his incarnation. He lived this very quiet life in the city of Varanasi, and all he did was meditate. He was a householder, he raised children, he had a government job, he retired on a pension. I mean, it's a very orderly life in which the greatness of it is internal. If you find yourself suddenly besieged by hostile forces and you're looking for the courage not to flinch in the face of this persecution, Lahiri may not be the first one that springs to mind. But if you have tuned yourself to the life of Christ and have walked the Via Dolorosa, the route from where he was arrested to where he was taken by the soldiers and and then tried and condemned and then walked to where he was crucified. I mean, I've literally physically walked that multiple times, which I can speak of in a moment. It gives you a feeling for how God manifests under those circumstances. Because we don't know what circumstances our lives are going to be. We may get to live lives like Lahiri Mahashaya, where the entire drama is internal, or we may be called um, to a life that is going to be quite different than that. I have to pause for a moment. Do we have a problem? Okay. My friend Suryani, who runs the camera, was doing things that made me think we had a problem. There's no point in my talking if nobody's listening to me or if it's all just turning into garbage. Okay. But moving along with that. So we can wait until such time as we ourselves are being persecuted and perhaps crucifixion is threatening, or we can take advantage of the fact that that vibration is emanating through this ray of grace, and we can find a way to understand it and to love it and to be in tune with it, so that it becomes part of who we are. When I was living as a nun in my little trailer at Ayodhya at Ananda village, I had my bed. My trailer was my bed, my little table, my little pot where I could cook and things like that, and also boil water and wash my hair and things like that. And the place where I meditated, that was my house, just in a row like that. And at this time, let me think, this was my second trailer. So at this time, my my bed was under, well, just technically, it was actually my first. And then I traded with Shivani for something smaller. Now I remember. So I had this shelf up here, and I had the pictures of all five of the gurus. And then I slept in a little platform bed right under that shelf. And literally one night, Babaji's picture flipped off the shelf and landed on my chest like this. None of the other pictures fell. Nothing happened. Babaji just landed on my chest and woke me up. And I thought to myself, maybe I'm supposed to tune into Babaji a little more than I have. And it just sort of brought me into understanding more about him, which I can talk about more later. But also, either we make the decision or one feels drawn. There was just a time, well, actually, when I came to Palo Alto, 1987, but it was before that. Let me be fair about this. No, it was really much before that. I just became very interested in Jesus. And it never felt to me like it was bringing me closer to Master. And this was long before there was any thought of there being the same jiva. It was just, Master talked all the time about Jesus. When you read Autobiography of a Yogi, when you read The Path, it's just, there's a tremendous amount from the New Testament and the Bible in both of those books. So I thought, well, if those who are guiding me are also attuned here, it will make me more in tune with them to be more in tune with him. But it was also karma. And when I read Master's commentary on the Bible, which I read in the form of the articles from the SRF magazines from the early years, this was something Shivani just got the old magazines because it was out of print. That book wasn't printed until the 90s, and Master wrote it in the 40s. So Shivani got the old magazines and Xeroxed them, and I remember reading them. And I remember when I was reading Master's commentary, I knew enough about Jesus, even though I didn't know much. And I just remember sitting by myself. I was in seclusion, and I closed the book, and I could just feel the living presence of Jesus with me. He was as real to me as Swami and Master were. And I realized that nothing I'd been told about Jesus was true. It's just like nothing I'd been told was true. And I thought to myself, how many other lies have I been told in my life that I'm going to have to now dismantle now that I'm on the spiritual path? And the answer is simply quite a few. Quite a few delusions. Lies is too strong a word, but delusions that were presented to me as truth. But I remember feeling Jesus as, the word I want to use is he was on my side. He was on my team, and he was cheering for me. And he had been a trailblazer, and he'd blazed a trail that was there now quite clearly marked for me to follow. And as I was saying, it was a trail above all of courage, and it was also a trail of, I've been given a job to do by God, and I will do it. Because if you think about Jesus's life, if you put into there that he went to India, he had 18 years in India. India's a very compatible culture, although he did antagonize the over orthodox, the fundamentalists. But India is a very compatible culture. Even in Master's time, when you read how hard it was for him to leave India, because it's a spiritual land. And so Jesus was born to do this particular job in Israel. And he was drawn to the Essene community. He was there to reestablish the Sanatan Dharma for that group and ultimately for the West. And he knew what was going to happen. So he finishes his duty, whatever it was in India. He knows now is the time. He comes back to I always say to the West. It wasn't exactly the West, but he came back to do this mission for the West. And then he just started. And he was part of the Essene community. This is the tradition that I believe. They knew he was coming. They knew what he was, and they supported him in this. And the Essenes were completely at odds with the power structure of the priests, and the priests were corrupted. And they were not teaching Sanatan Dharma anymore. They had gotten themselves in a position of authority and power. They were interpreting the teachings to keep their authority and power. Institutional religion versus inner communion. And Jesus was there to break that down, because darkness had set in, and he was there to restore Dharma. So as soon as he arrived, he started gathering his disciples, and they went on this mission. And it was also understood, you see, at the time, the Essenes were not the only ones. The Jews were an oppressed people politically, and in every other way. They had no voice, and they had been a freer, greater people in the past. And there were many predictions that the Messiah was coming, and that they would be liberated from this oppression. So when Jesus appeared with this kind of power, there was a ready expectation to believe that he was the Messiah, and that the golden hour of the Jewish people was going to come. And that golden hour would not just be spiritual power, it would also be worldly power. And so when Jesus was there, immediately there was this, there was always controversy swirling around him, because he was orthodox in the sense that he was knowledgeable in the scriptures, and he taught from the scriptures. He didn't repudiate in any way the tradition of Judaism that he was there. I come to fulfill the prophets, he said, not to deny them. This is what I'm here. And as I said, he taught in the same way that the others taught, but he didn't teach the way the Jewish authorities taught. And so it began to create this the priestly authorities. See, everybody in the situation was Jewish. So later it became the Christians against the Jews, but it was never like that. In the life of Jesus, the true religion of the time was Judaism. Everything else was pagan. And so he was bringing a reformation to Judaism. And it only ever became separate from Judaism after he died, when the Orthodox, the organized Jewish culture rejected the idea that Jesus had been the Messiah. And so those Jews who believed that Jesus was the Messiah became split. from those two, they became two entities, and eventually Paul took the message to people who cared, which was the Gentiles, and it gradually became something else. But from the first time that Jesus stepped back into that world, he knew he was on a trajectory to crucifixion. And he never hesitated, never hesitated. There was never anything in him that sought to avoid it or in any way tried to tone down what he was doing. He had a mission from God, and he was going to fulfill it. So, among other lessons, and this is the first one that I'll speak of in this way, is just that. If we feel called by God and we know what we're supposed to do, we just have to do it. We can have ideas about how it would be nicer if it ended differently. And at the end of Jesus's life, he wept. He wept for Jerusalem. He wept for those, that the whole thing had to happen. He prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane when he knew he was about to be arrested. He prayed, "Let this cup pass from me." And it's a grave misinterpretation, Master says, to think in that moment that he himself lost courage. He didn't lose courage, but he was heartbroken because he had come to bring this liberating message of divine joy, and rather than being embraced, he knew he was going to be profoundly rejected. And simultaneously, he knew the destiny and he knew the inevitability. But this is the remarkable mystery of divine incarnation, which is they are completely divine and they're also completely human. They take the divinity and come all the way into the human life, into the human world, into the human heart, into the human feelings. But the difference between them and us is that their consciousness then also expands all the way to infinity, where once we come down into the human level, we only can move toward infinity to a certain extent, and then a veil of delusion and confusion, it's like it holds us back. Delusion is like a ballast on a hot air balloon. And so the avatar has no ballast, no delusion, so he can be experiencing human life and simultaneously float into the infinite. Whereas when we experience human life, our delusion holds us there, and we can only float as high as our realization, our freedom from delusion. But at a certain point, we simply can't go. We can't be any freer. We can't be any more elevated. But Jesus saw the tragedy of what was about to occur, that souls that he was trying to uplift and to save were so frightened by the expanded vision of reality that he was presenting to them, that in their fear they had to reject it. And in their attachment to their position, to their power, to their wealth, they had to reject it. And it was for their suffering that Jesus wept. It was the painful realization that these people were not going to accept him, but were going to doom themselves to more lifetimes of suffering. That was the bitter cup that Jesus didn't want to drink. However, he then said, "Thy will, not mine, be done." Because with his divine self, he knew that there was no other way, that the drama of his death and of his arrest and crucifixion was, to a large extent, the message he was going to give. Swamiji commented on that. He said, more than most avatars, or certainly unique or standing strong, Jesus' teaching was his life. There's teaching in the Bible, it's there, but it's the life he lived and the way he lived it that is what really transforms us if we can tune into it. What enabled him to be so courageous? What would it feel like to be able, to stand in front of the man who had the power to release him from crucifixion and make no effort whatsoever to persuade him that he should be released? Even Pontius Pilate, who was there, who was the authority who had to decide whether to crucify him or not, and Pontius Pilate wanted to free him. His wife had had a dream and warned him, "Don't be responsible for this man's death." So Pontius Pilate wanted to free him, and Jesus just wouldn't help. He wouldn't testify. He wouldn't answer the questions. And Pontius Pilate, in frustration, said, "Don't you know I have the power to free you or to crucify you?" And Jesus said, "You have no power over me, except that my Father in heaven has given it to you. And even now, if it were my Father's will, 12 legions of angels would come and rescue me. But this is God's will. This is how it has to happen." It's just, now what gives a person the capacity to speak like that at such a moment? Well, worth thinking about, isn't it? Well, my friends, God bless you.